here today with Declan, Senior Consultant in our property team, and he attended the UK's Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum in Leeds last week. It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is, yeah.
How was it?
UKREiiF. It's a bit easier. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, how was it?
Yeah, it was really good. I think the attendance was really positive. So last year it was like 3,500, and this year it was between 7 and 8. So
that's a lot of people.
much busier, much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a lot of conversation about MIPIM, potentially whether this would be a bit of a replacement, because it's not in the south of France, so it doesn't look as bad for councils to be travelling.
Slightly more accessible for more people, I think that's...
Absolutely, yeah. It was a good showcase for Leeds as a city. It was really well put together. There was plenty of space. I think potentially could have done with a little bit more room inside some of the pavilions, but perhaps not necessarily expecting quite the turnout. So next year it'll be interesting to see how they do with that.
Yeah, they've already put in the dates and they're keeping it in Leeds for next year, I understand.
Yeah, already fully booked in a lot of the hotels, so that's interesting. We've already booked ours. So yeah, I think from the conversations we were having, everybody was saying that they're very much going to be in attendance next year. So probably with slightly bigger teams, I'd imagine.
Fantastic. So you said between 7,000 and 8,000. I think 7,500 was what they pitched it at officially. Who were the 7,500 other than 2 or 3 little recruitment people from West?
So it was quite a good mixture actually. There was all sorts of people from developers, from local authorities. There was some consultants there as well as some construction firms. So it was from a kind of business perspective, there was quite a vast array of people there. Not huge amounts of recruiters, but yeah, I mean, it probably works better for us.
Well, I mean, we're not the target market in essence. So for those not familiar with the event, what is actually the main purpose of the event?
So the main purpose of the event is to discuss kind of real estate and infrastructure investment. So a lot of the local authorities were there to try and obtain investment for their local areas. So it was quite funny that we all had badges with kind of what we were in terms of delegates or sponsors or speakers, and there was a few floating around with investor written on there. So they were the ones that everybody was trying to catch, try and get some investment for these major projects that they're trying to do across the UK. So yeah, that was probably the main aim for that.
That's great. I think their blurb, if I remember, was very much talking about facilitating or accelerating the levelling up agenda. Yeah,
absolutely. So there was a lot of things being done behind the scenes. It was quite nice because there was a good mix of walking around. There was so many people engaging in conversation. There was people sat down having conversations and meetings, as well as perhaps a little bit more organic just within the talks and the panels, but there was also other places where there were things going on behind the scenes, and they actually announced quite a few schemes over the course of the few days with investment that had been secured and kind of agreements that had been put in place between both the private and public sector for some good work to come.
Fantastic. So what were the main themes of this year's event?
So EDI played a massive part. There was a pavilion that was purely focused around that. There was a lot of talk about sustainability, kind of solutions to the housing crisis, how kind of the public and the private sector can work together. Just some of the general challenges that are being faced and perhaps what can be done to kind of get around that really.
Okay. Well, you mentioned ED&I. That's obviously really is on our agenda as a business and as a talent supplier into the property sector at large. What came out of that?
So I think it was firstly just good that it was being recognised and it was being kind of separated as quite an important issue. So obviously they've given it a pavilion tent. There was talks all the way through the few days, and they all seemed to be extremely constructive, which obviously shows it's on everybody's radar. Perhaps more of an agenda than it had been previously. And actually at the event it was the kind of mixture of people from different backgrounds that you had there, and kind of covering all areas really was good to see.
Okay, and then obviously sustainability is huge in the sector generally. Everybody's got their targets in terms of developing all projects. What came out of that?
So there was quite a lot of discussion around the onus of on the developers and the authorities and the people that were actually building the newer sites to try and build more sustainable homes. Because I think one thing that they identified was potentially people who are existing homeowners or there's existing stock. It's not as straightforward and it's quite costly to do it, and perhaps there's less incentive for some people to do it. So if we can be more sustainable in the way that we build and the types of properties that we build, then that will help moving forward. Not just, we need to replace some windows and boilers and such. So building ready to go properties.
So in terms of sustainability, obviously a lot of discussion, but presumably a lot of the developers and anybody in the supply chain actually has to meet their own targets. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think perhaps one of the challenges that we face is having the stock of like the heat pumps, for example, that we need in order to be able to make all of these homes sustainable. So that's a challenge that will be faced. And potentially looking at other methods of construction as well that might be more environmentally friendly or sustainable. But yeah, it's another thing that was discussed in quite some detail that is clearly very high up in the agenda for everybody that's involved.
Okay. I noticed one of the sessions you attended was bold solutions for the UK's housing crisis. So what are these bold solutions?
Right, so it was a very good session. It was quite interesting. There was a few people there from investment funds, there was local authority representation, there was housing association representation. I think there was a lot of discussion around build to rent within that as an opportunity to bring homes to the market a lot faster than perhaps with the build for sale market. That side of things is a good solution in terms of being able to get it to market quicker, primarily within the private sector, private rental sector. So they were saying it's a very good investment opportunity. Doesn't do a great deal for the social housing sector because obviously there's a cost attributed to the types of places that they're looking to build, but still good all the same. I think one thing that was lacking was perhaps a bit more discussion around the alternative modern methods of construction. Didn't really have much discussion around modular build, which could potentially be a good way to speed up the process, albeit they did say that there's potentially some greater issues around the risks involved of transporting these types of builds across cities with bridges and things like that, and obviously from an insurance perspective if it gets damaged in transit. But it was a good discussion. There was clearly everybody knows that we need to try and come up with some solutions, but I think the panel essentially got to the point where they said, look, there isn't a quick fix. It's going to take time. But what we need to do is have the right attitude towards it, know that it's something that we need to focus on, and just do everything we can to deliver it. And I feel like that's very much what the outcome of it was.
Okay, fantastic. You work with local councils every day. Did you get a sense of some of the main challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, so I think from a local authority perspective, they have a challenge just in terms of where they attribute their funds. So they have a finite budget that they're able to spend, and they've got a massive juggling act in terms of, is it spent on existing stock because they have a duty of care to the tenants that they've got in place already, or is it spent on building new homes for those people that are actually waiting for that? I mean, there were some huge numbers thrown around in terms of targets for numbers of homes. Some were saying 80,000, some were saying 36,000, and it's all within quite a short space of time. Whilst they were also dealing with changes in legislation, recently there's been a change in terms of damp and mould legislation. So now they're not allowed to take into consideration how tenants live. It's got to be, fully safe for everybody, irrelevant of whether somebody's dry and they're washing in their front room. So there's a lot of changes with legislation for landlords, and that hits the social housing sector massively in terms of cost, because they're liable and responsible for making sure that it's maintained, whilst having so many people waiting on a housing list. So that's one of the big challenges, is trying to juggle that funding and put it in the right place.
So it sounds there's a lot to talk about and a lot of issues covered, and obviously we've just touched the surface, and I know that we're going to follow up with some written articles on this for everybody to find out a little bit more. But how does everything that you heard affect the job market? That's what's relevant to us as talent suppliers. How does it in the short term and then going forward as well?
Yeah, so I think we've seen quite an upturn recently with development type roles anyway. We know that there's issues within the town planning sector for staffing, which was addressed to an extent during the conference, but there will be a shortage of people that are able to lead these development projects. So that's going to be quite a big issue, I think, potentially over the next sort of 6 months or so, because everybody's got such big targets they need to hit, and they need to have the staff in place to do it.
And typically, what job titles are those?
So anything from project manager or program manager, development managers, these kind of people that are able to not only run a project but also obtain the correct funding that's needed, and set these projects up through from inception to completion, to actually get tenants within them.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then in terms of the longer term, where are we going to be in 2, 3, 4 years' time?
Again, I think a lot of these developments that we're talking about, they're long-term schemes. So it doesn't take a few months to build thousands of homes. It takes a long time, and so this will likely carry on for a while. And again, there's always going to be updates to legislation. There's always going to be an increased need for housing. So for the foreseeable, I think it's going to be going on. The needs are going to be in the same place.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks.